Lore of the Old Ones, Chapter 11, A Green Menace. Orcs and goblins are destructive creatures, interested only in fighting and breaking things. They're a scourge to all lands and a bane to civilization. They raid ceaselessly, carrying war and barbarism to every corner of the Warhammer world. Yet they are also extremely adaptable, able to thrive in the harshest of environments, mimicking the technologies of their enemies, and enthusiastically adopting new ways of making war. Long ago, the first orcs and goblins appeared upon the world, much to the disappointment of the Old Ones, having crossed the interstellar deeps by stowing themselves away aboard the Old Ones' magnificent craft. These interlopers crept from the vessel upon which they hid, and spread out into the young world seeking refuge in its wild places. Here, hidden from the gaze of the Old Ones, and seemingly forgotten about in the hope they would quickly starve, the warlike creatures prospered. Tribes grew rapidly, roaming the barren wastelands, hunting herds of great beasts, fighting one another, and generally having tremendous fun. As their numbers grew, they spilled out of the southern deserts and volcanic plains, invading the lush lands of the young races, and finding fertile hunting grounds, pleasant climates, and, most importantly, new enemies. In the mountains they encountered the dwarfs. From fighting these hardy warriors, the orcs and goblins learned the value of iron and steel, and quickly began to forge their own crude weapons and armor. Many goblin tribes began to explore deep caves and caverns, finding vast underground realms to inhabit and a wealth of fungi to sustain them, often with hilarious side effects ranging from deadly toxicity to mind-altering intoxication. From here they tunneled further, finding hidden ways into the underground layers of the dwarfs, the better to make war upon their enemies. Along the coast of the Old World, the migrating orcs and goblins encountered elves, and, whilst their jeering hordes watched the tall and strangely fragrant beings flee across the waves, they learned the joy of boats. Soon the adventurous creatures were sailing the seas of the world in ramshackle craft. Carried hither and yon by wind and current, they came upon distant lands such as Ulthuan and Lustria. These were eagerly invaded, and as their hordes ravaged coastal settlements and laid siege to great inland cities, ever more enemies appeared, keen to fight the intruders. In the frozen north of the Old World they first encountered the primitive tribes of man. Great must their joy have been, for these creatures seemed as barbaric and warlike as any orc, and as cunning and vindictive as any goblin. Where the dwarfs would bar their great iron doors against them, and the elves would rain arrows on them from afar, in man the orcs and goblins had found a foe that would face them head-on in battle, meeting them blade to blade. So numerous have the warlike orcs and goblins become, that, should they ever stop fighting and turn their minds to conquest, they would sweep away all opposition in a brutal tide of violence. Orcs and goblins live in warrior tribes or warbands, sometimes forming into tribes that consist exclusively of one or the other, but most often gathering together, their distinctive differences strengthening the collective force. These groupings range from a few hundred to staggeringly vast hordes that cover the lands in heaving seas of green flesh and rusted metal. They can be found throughout the world, and, disconcertingly for peace-seeking folk, there isn't a habitat in which the adaptable creatures cannot thrive. From the scorching heat of the Southlands to the frozen steppes of Kislev, from the forests of the Empire to the high peaks of the World's Edge Mountains, a traveller cannot hope to avoid them. Though these prolific creatures do not have a distinct kingdom of their own, there are vast tracts of lands where they dominate completely. The notoriously dangerous region known quite justifiably as the Badlands, which lies between the southern World's Edge Mountains and the Black Mountains, is one such place, and it is from here that many invasions of the Old World originate. Most tribes are semi-nomadic, due in part to the fact that a successful tribe destroys everything within many days' march of its camp. Thus a tribe must be constantly on the move, seeking out rich new lands to devastate and despoil. Any warboss worth their rusty iron-shod boots considers anything visible on the horizon as their rightful stomping grounds, and anyone who disagrees had better be prepared for a fight. If belligerence could be personified, it would look much like an orc. Broader and more muscular than a man, these green-skinned brutes have large heads, powerful jaws, low brows, and great tusk-like teeth. They are dim-witted but adaptable, with dense hides that protect them from harm and thick skulls that protect them from the perils of philosophy. But by far their most defining characteristic is their love of violence. Orcs live to fight. Indeed, when not surrounded by a maelstrom of violence and bloodshed, orcs quickly become bored, some slipping into brooding lethargy, others attempting more adventurous activities such as the crafting of crude weapons, the training of reluctant mounts, or the building of great effigies from rock and dung. But orcs find such non-violent behaviour taxing, and before long they will begin looking for ways to unleash their pent-up aggression. To orcs there is nothing better in life than battling one's enemies, and should enemies prove scarce, all orcs know that punching another orc quickly creates a new enemy. In orc culture, such as it is, the largest and strongest quickly become leaders, imposing their will through strength, brutality and shouting. Black orcs, named for their dour demeanour and bleak sense of humour as much as for their dark green skin, are by far the most notable and fearsome. The largest of their kind can often be found as leaders accompanied by a bodyguard of fellow Black Orcs hungry for war. Many of the most notable Orc hordes are led by Black Orc warlords. Smaller and more nimble than Orcs, Goblins are comparatively intelligent creatures, with scrawny limbs and irritating voices that never seem to cease. Whilst feeble compared to their larger kin, and prone to extreme acts of cowardice, history has repeatedly shown that a Goblin horde can defeat the most redoubtable of foes through weight of numbers. Vicious and mean-spirited, Goblins far prefer to attack from behind, assail foes already weakened by battle, or better still, both at the same time. Despite their differences, Orcs and Goblins naturally congregate together, and it is a rare tribe that does not include both. Although Goblins often suffer terribly whilst in the company of Orcs, such a symbiotic arrangement has its advantages. In battle, Goblins can rely on their stronger cousins to do most of the fighting, whilst they seek vulnerabilities in the enemy battle lines to exploit with sneak attacks and make use of their ingenious war machines to bombard the enemy from afar. Yet being every bit as adaptable as Orcs, Goblins do form tribes alone, which can be found in many and varied lands. From the volcanic expanse of the Darklands to the lush fields of Britannia, nomadic tribes of Goblin wolf riders swarm. Within the primordial forests of the Empire, spider-riding Goblins lurk. In the many caves that riddle the world's edge mountains, the sprawling lairs of black-robed night Goblins wage unrelenting war against the dwarf kingdoms and any who dare cross the highland passes. Orcs and Goblins are extremely superstitious, and some would say gullible, creatures. As such, they are willing to believe in lesser deities and prone to following strange cults. Yet for all their love of petty fetishes and minor idols, their pantheon is dominated by the boisterous and belligerent brother gods known as Gork and Mork. The followers of Gork and Mork seldom call upon them for aid in times of need, nor do they beseech them for gifts, as less robust races do of their gods. Instead, these war gods and their infamous deeds serve as inspiration. Gork is brutal but cunning, Mork is cunning but brutal, and every Orc and Goblin lives in a sure and certain knowledge that if they are brutal or cunning enough in life, they will join their gods in eternal battle in death. Amongst their followers, the power of Gork and Mork causes the phenomenon known as the War, an almost spiritual calling to war that fills every Orc and Goblin with frenetic energy. Shamans, as the innumerable tribe calls their magic users, are living conduits through which this power is manifested for all to see. When their armies march to war, and the power of the War rises, shamans attempt to harness and manipulate it, using it to blast their foes or rouse their warriors to greater heights of violence. However, such communication with the gods has a profound effect upon the mind of a shaman, as evidenced by their strange antics and peculiar habits.